The World Championship match between the world champion Magnus Carlsen and his challenger Jan Nepomniachtchi begins in Dubai on Friday the 26th of November. That's game one. It's going to be fascinating. I think it's really unpredictable. But I've been going through their previous games in roughly chronological order to try and divine what might happen. And it's been really interesting because they've landed blows on each other. In the last videos, I showed you a couple of blitz games where Magnus Carlsen triumphed. That was in 2017. After that, they had an uneventful draw, a classical game, in the Sinkfield Cup, 2017. Then in the London Chess Classic in December 2017, that was a crazy game, classical game. Carlsen was white, but Nepo defeated him. There were some extraordinary blunders made by Carlsen, actually. Now, I recorded the video of that game at the time in December 2017. So if you want to have a look at that, please do, because it's a fascinating game. You'll find the link up there or down there somewhere. So Carlsen, Nepomniachtchi, London Chess Classic 2017. It is an extraordinary game. Lots of ups and downs, very uneven. After that, we had Carlsen defeated Nepo in a rapid play game in 2017. It was a kind of technical grind. We had some tame draws in the World Championship Blitz tournament in 2018. A brief but exciting draw in Tata Steel 2019. A couple of draws in the Abidjan Blitz 2019. I see, I'm being very thorough here. Bear with me. I'm going to show you a fantastic game in a second. Then we had a brilliant Kalashnikov played by Carlsen in the Abidjan Rapid Tournament in 2019. Now, again, I've recorded that video. I've looked at that game just a few weeks ago when I was talking about the Kalashnikov and my wonderful course for Chessable. So you'll find the link to that up there or down there somewhere. So do check that out. It's a brilliant game by Carlsen. But that was rapid play. So that was in 2019. And finally, we come on to this game that I'm going to show you, which was played in the Grand Chess Tour event in Zagreb in Croatia in the summer of 2019. So it's a classical game. Nepo was white, Carlsen was black. Now, if you recall, Nepo has, or had to this point, a superb record in classical games against Carlsen. He won a couple of games when they were kids in junior tournaments, but even after that, well, the London Chess Classic game in 2017 showed that Carlsen struggled against him. I mean, again, you can check out those games in the previous videos. But let's have a look at this game. So, classical game, 2019, summer of 2019 in Zagreb. Nepo playing white. And if you recall, at that time, Carlsen had changed his repertoire and had started playing the Sveshnikov. And so this is a kind of anti-Sveshnikov system, knight c3. You can play knight f6 here. That's interesting. You can play g6 and head for a kind of dragon. But Carlsen goes for e5. Well, he likes to do that. He likes a fixed centre. You know, that's very typical of Carlsen's style. You'll notice he does that sometimes with the white pieces when he plays the English. There's a slight problem with e5 in this position, that the bishop can actually reach this excellent diagonal very quickly, or immediately indeed. But this is a well-known position, and Carlsen has a lot of experience in this line with both colours. So here, bishop e7 is a popular choice. And then this is one of the main lines. And in fact, Nepo and Carlsen had an online game in 2020 that went in exactly this way. And this is a very typical line. So white has manoeuvred the knight round, and takes some control over d5, but actually with this bishop on e6, that's a very solid development. And well, this is a really typical line where the bishop comes out to g5. In some ways it's very similar to Kalashnikov's strategy. If you just remove those pawns, it could be a Kalashnikov actually. And white, you could say, very slightly better, but black fights back. With this bishop out here and this bishop here. So bishop e7 is the main line, and that's a pretty solid choice for black. But Carlsen played g6, and this is quite a risky move, actually. d3 from Nepo. And here, you know, if black plays a normal move like bishop g7, then knight g5 is actually quite a tempting move. Hitting the pawn, and then white takes the initiative. I mean, the knight is terrible on h6. Let's come back. So Carlsen played h6 to prevent knight g5. Now look at this. Black has already made 4 pawn moves in the opening. Which, you know, that is pretty extravagant. You know, that's risky. You might be able to get away with it if the position remains closed, but it's risky. Nepo plays h4, going for the attack straight away, and why not? Because, you know, he might be able to create some holes in black's position. Another pawn move from Carlsen, and the point is after h5, g5 keeps the position closed. If black is careless and plays like this, then already white has a tremendous attack here. You can take and play queen h5, and well, black is really suffering there. So Carlsen has to keep the position closed, but now it's not just this d5 square is weak, but look at that f5 square. So positionally, this is really on the edge for black. And Nepo plays knight h2, looking to maneuver that knight round to perhaps e3 to look at the f5 square. Knight g4, knight e7. I mean, if I were to guess, you know, who was playing white and who was playing black, if I had to choose whether it was Nepo or Carlsen, I'd say, you know, Carlsen would be playing with the white pieces. This is so typical of the kind of chess he likes, controlling those squares. But yeah, and that's why I find this fascinating. So basically Carlsen has to try and shake white's control, and he's starting to do that. So he's put the king on h8, and you know, he might be able to play f5 here. So Nepo just shuts down that possibility. And that means, well, look at those lovely pawns there. That means this bishop on g7 is a bit of a sickly piece. It's not going anywhere for a long time. And the f5 square is, you know, under control. So what is Carlsen up to? Superficially, it looks very nice for white. But let's just watch what happens. Rook b8. Okay, that's the start of perhaps a little bit of counterplay. So, you know, this could be a possibility. So a4 shuts that down. Now, you know, if I were playing this in a blitz game, I think I'd go bishop e6 very quickly. Of course, you know, you want, well, if white's exchanges here, then that's a mistake, because now black's pawn controls those squares and black is absolutely fine. But of course, white doesn't need to exchange off, and we'll put the knight into d5. I mean, that's playable for black, actually, but instead of that, Carlsen played knight d4. So he occupies this square, but of course that can be driven away at some moment. Knight d5. And here is where Carlsen, well, he reveals his plan. Instead of the you know, automatic bishop e6, he plays knight e6. So the fight back starts here. That knight moves into f4. Now that's a beautiful square for the knight. So it sort of, you know, dangles across into white's position. And also looks at the knight on d5. So Carlsen is actually fighting for control over d5. But of course, if that knight is exchanged off, then it opens up this bishop. So that actually that bishop has some influence over the game. You know, white would be reluctant to exchange off that beautiful knight. So that's kind of interesting. Now Nepo plays the queen to b1. Okay, looks mysterious, but watch what happens. So bishop e6. Finally the bishop comes to e6. But notice he didn't play it earlier because that would have blocked the knight's path to f4. So now he's managed to get two pieces looking at the d5 square. Now if he can exchange off on d5 and white recaptures with a pawn, then f5 will start to open the position. So that's why Nepo has played the queen over to a2, so you can see everything is protected here. And if black were to exchange here, then, well, that's exactly what white wants. Then the king can just step up here, the rook can come over, and white would have a small but very pleasant positional edge there, and can look to break open the queen side. But of course, that's not why Carlsen played the knight here. He doesn't want to just exchange on d5. He wants to keep tension in the position. So queen d7. And watch this. Suddenly it might be possible to take here and get the queen in. With white's queen way across the other side of the board in Siberia. I'm going to be saying that again. Then that sacrifice actually looks very dangerous. So that's why Nepo played rook g1. Now b6. Here. Now at this moment it might be possible to exchange here and then exchange bishops. So I mean, not that that's the end of the world for black, but watch what Carlsen does now. He takes on d5 with the bishop. So exchanges off his good bishop, leaving Nepo with this beautiful bishop, this light square bishop on d5. And again, this would be very nice for white. I mean, no problems at all. But Carlsen leaves the bishop there, plays a6. So the bishop steps back. So Nepo perhaps looking to exchange off here, given the right moment. Now I think this next move of Carlsen's is really subtle. I think it's brilliant. Just have a think. How would you play with black in this position? I'll tell you what, I'll do you a favour. I'll flip the board round so you can look at it from black's viewpoint. Black to play, what would you do? If you guess this one, congratulations, because this is really tough. I'll have a slurp of tea, you have a little think. Just a second. That is good stuff. Okay, black to play, what would you do? Well, he didn't play b5. That would open up the a file. Not that that's the end of the world, but watch. He played queen e7. Now I'm going to flip the board back. If I hit the right buttons, there we go. Queen e7. So what on earth is this move about? It's very subtle. In fact, the point is, it's looking at white's king. Now I know the e file is closed. It's also has its eye on this square as well. Now, really? Okay, watch. It's really clever. So Nepo now, well, what does white do? I mean, white has a problem here. He'd perhaps like to play his king here to connect the rooks, but knight here is a problem. So how do you connect the rooks? If black does open, you want your rooks connected. So rook f1, I mean, it looks very slow, but basically it's preparing king f2 to connect the rooks. Now b5. Nepo exchanges, which looks reasonable considering that he controls the open file. But here, if queen a7, then it's possible to take and just stop the queen exchange. And, well, black is fine. You've got to watch out for f5. And the king is in some trouble, actually. So Nepo played king f2, so he's connected the rooks. But now, watch what happens. Carlsen strikes with c4, he can sense that the king is not quite secure, so he starts to open the position. Now, watch, this is incredible. Watch what happens if his pawn is taken. Doesn't seem like a big deal, but now d5. So that opens up this diagonal, gets the bishop on a funny square. f5. Now, if that's taken with this pawn, then queen c5 wins, check, wins the bishop. G takes f5. g4. Now, there you go. The queen suddenly gets into the action, and basically all hell breaks loose in that position. And black is probably doing very well. Now, that's not forced. White is probably still okay here, but it looks absolutely terrifying, and I think understandably, Nepo decided, okay, I'm going to exchange off that knight. It looks too strong. By the way, if G takes f4, then the king just steps here, and actually the queen doesn't really do much when it gets there because the rook is defending. So E takes f4, so the bishop is opened, the diagonal for the bishop is opened finally. Now, if here, well, you don't really want to open the b file, that still looks terrifying. So Nepo, basically, he tried to keep a lid on things. He played rook d1, which I think is very understandable. You know, the position looks like it's breaking open. So he would rather have Carlsen exchange on d3 and rook d3, keep the position closed, the king steps over. You know, he's trying to maintain a kind of positional grip here, which could well be possible if, you know, that happens and white controls the a file. This rook could come across. But Carlsen understands he needs to keep shaking the position. f5, what an incredible follow-up. Again, you know, he's just offering pawns just to rip open the lines. And here Nepo made a quick move, and it was, I'm afraid, not a good move. He should take here. And actually white is still fine. After this check, it looks terrifying, but in fact, the king is still okay on h3, and this is a mad position. The computers think that it's still about equal. But, you know, fantastically complicated. Instead, Nepo took here. He's under pressure. It's a 50-50, and he makes the wrong choice. g4, another pawn sack. Now, incredibly, there is no good defense for white in this position. I mean, it really is remarkable. So obviously this allows the queen to come to h4. Now, what happens on rook h1? Check this out. Bishop check, takes, and queen g7. And because the bishop controls g1, then there isn't really a good defense to this. Or potentially, you know, the rook coming to g8 and then the queen coming down. I mean, it's absolutely remarkable. Or what about king e2? Well, in this case, rook takes f5. There you go, the queen on e7, perfectly placed for this counterattack. And now the rook swings over and is in. And again, black has a wonderful attack. I'm going to say it again. Look at white's queen. It's in Siberia. It looked fantastic a few moments ago on this diagonal and controlling the file, but now it's just completely out of play. Now the play has shifted to the king side. g4 just played. Nepo played d4 to try to shut out that bishop, but watch what happens. Queen check, king e2, queen h2, and after the rook came up, that was the end of the game. That was the final move of the game. I mean, how rapid was that? Why did Nepo resign? Well, if king takes, queen check skewers king and rook. And if king e1, queen g1 check, and queen e3 is mate. What a beautiful finish. That's a problem mate. That's the so-called epaulette mate, where the king has shoulder pads, epaulettes. And that is checkmate. Wonderful stuff. I mean, what an incredible game. What I love about that is how Carlsen played was that he had safe continuations at various moments. I mean, coming right back into the opening, for example, where here kind of normal move is just bishop e6. But instead he found this fascinating maneuver that just kept tension in the game. It didn't guarantee him the advantage, but what it did was it created tension. That is what Carlsen is really good at finding, creating in a position. And suddenly it's a game where all three results are possible. Whereas, if you play bishop e6 earlier, you don't get the knight to f4. Then it feels as though black is always a little bit worse. Probably tenable, but here anything can happen. And after these pawn sacrifices, again, Carlsen just sowed confusion. The pressure was on, and Nepo cracked with that move g takes f5 and g4. Incredible. That was the first classical game that Carlsen had won against Nepomniachtchi. And that made the score 4-1. And in fact, that's still the score now. Carlsen in classical games is 4-1 down. But that was the last classical game with a decisive result between them. And that was pretty convincing. I don't know what we can divine from that. Carlsen's incredible will to win. That Nepo, yes, he's good with in non-standard positions, but he got tripped up there pretty badly. I'll be showing you more of their previous games. But what strikes me is that they're all really different. Sometimes strategic games, sometimes mad games like this. Just all very unpredictable. I do hope the World Championship match is going to be like that.